Welcome to Watercolor Wednesday, and my name is Kathy Futrell, and I am here at the Church of the Palms with a watercolor class. Today we're working on painting apples and building a composition using lights and shadows. Come join us. All right, so what we're going to do today for the apples, I'm going to be looking at the apples in different positions on the plate, but I'm going to have a view where I'm looking down. So I'm shifting this plate of apples off to my side, and I'm going to bring my watercolor paper here. So I'll be looking at this as a reference, and from time to time I'll bring the apples back and kind of, well, I think basically you understand what I'm going to be doing. I'll be looking over here at the apples. And before I draw the plate, I thought that I would begin with the forms of the apples and then connect the plate as I see the plate. So I'm looking at the shape of the apples as just a contour sketch. And when I do this, I try to suggest where the patterns and lines of the apples are going. Okay, so this apple is turned on its side with a stem that's coming out. And now, your apples study, by the way, and you can set your apples up in a row. You can create your own arrangement. But what we really want to do today is pay attention not only to the coloration and the patterns and the textures on these apples, but we also want to look at shapes and forms. And I want to talk a little bit more about color, positive and negative spaces, but color as we paint. Also, as I sketch these two front ones I'm looking at, I see that the one behind is a little smaller apple, which is good, I guess. Oops, I am doing something wrong because there is space between these two, and I'm using just my wonder if I put these two close together. This looks right. Okay, this one looks like it has a little space between here and here. And yeah, that's good, like that. I think this is just right. Okay. Now this little apple does not have a stem, but by golly, I like having the stem in the painting. This one doesn't have one. Maybe I should stick one in there. I don't know. It's up to you. Not all the apples are going to have a stem. And then I'm going to designate where all of my highlights are. Jim, I'm going to wait on those and do that later. Those handouts.
Misunderstood and got 14 instead of 16.
That's perfect. No problem. We don't have that many people right here, right this minute anyway. So I'm doing highlights. This is what I see with the highlights on the apples. So I draw around them so I don't forget to have them. Now, the plate is next. So I'm looking for where the rim is in relation to the apples. And I see that this apple has the plate going behind, and then I see the plate continuing over here, and it goes behind and comes out over here. Actually, it looks like I got a crooked plate. But I ended up with an oval because of the angle that I have. The rim of this plate, I may need to adjust it right here. This is definitely coming out further. Okay, and also where my line here goes, I need to be sure it matches up whether it does or not. And it does. And then I have this rim, and I may be doing some of this pattern that's on the plate that's kind of a leaf pattern. I almost used for my plate a willow ware, and then I said, no, that's too much pattern. But I love the idea of the red color with the blue, and also the contrast of this dark. Now, I'm going to cut off the back of this with the dark. I also wish that I like the idea of the 3 apples. I like the idea of doing the plate design, and I'm going to do a little bit of the patterning today to demonstrate that, but I probably won't finish that, and I probably won't finish all 3 of the apples. I'm going to observe where the shadows go, And I'm getting some multiple shadows because of the room having multiple shadows here. I do like this little pattern play, and you can simplify that as you wish. Okay, let's get started with our painting. I do think that I'll do some dark background around this, and if I like this better, I might crop it off, and then again, I might say, well, I wish that I had placed something else in this design. And I'll tell you why I say that. When we do still life, and this is an illustration from an artist called Donald Craig, and what he did was to use a flower arrangement with the glass, like we've been studying glass and water. We have background, which is this drapery, and a table surface with drapery, and we have these beautiful plums. And so that's part of a visual where we're looking straight down on the subject, straight on the subject, not straight down, but straight on. So I'm going to be working with the reds, and I'm going to be using my, this is my rose madder. This is my cadmium red, and you can see how bright that is. It's probably too bright for most of these apples. So I'm going to take a little bit of my bumblebee yellow, because it occurs to me that a lot of these apples have a great deal of yellow in the beginning. So when I start, well, that's really bright. That's okay. When I begin, I put color and I add water, and I like to work as a contour. You know, sometimes I'm unconscious as I begin to do something like this, just unconsciously. Please feel free to come up and look. I'm putting on some layers. So I see a lot of yellow, which I hadn't even thought of until I started looking, but there is a great deal underneath all of this red. So I started to think, okay, my apples are red, but my apples are a lot more than just red. There are, and it's impossible to put those little yellow dots that I see because that's lighter than the red. Here I have a great deal of yellow coming this way, and of course that apple was turned a little more. Now there was a space in here. Now I'm trying to put this back the way it was, but I think you'll bear with me knowing that I know it ain't gonna happen exactly the way it was. Okay, why isn't this one standing up better? I think I must have had it more like that. Nope, it was definitely laying down. It doesn't look like the same way I looked at it, but I'm just going with it. I know there was a little space. Okay, boy, the distortion of what I saw when it was sitting over here. Bear with me, please. Please, when you do your painting, paint what you see, draw what you see, and then paint what you see. All right, so I will begin now. After getting some yellows in here, I have mixed up this lovely red that's a little, well, I need to keep it light and then get darker and darker. So I will begin with putting in some of the red with over my yellow. I'm using a nice little round pointed number 8, a Raphael. No, it's my Richson brush. And I'm usually using, all of these brushes are lovely cheap Joe brushes, by the way, and many of them are the synthetics. But this particular one is a sable, and I also have one right here that's called a pseudo sable, and it's a Miller's also, but that works just as nicely as the sable brush. So I'm going to, I use the pointed one and bring all of my lines in toward the center, leaving that stem. I'm not masking out anything today. I am going to try to avoid where my whites are going to be. In other words, my highlights. This is a great deal more lights than I have indicated. And when I say contour paint, that means the brushwork follows the form of the apple. So as I move the brush across the surface, I'm trying to round that. And I'm going to go to the next one and let some of these layers begin to dry. This is a bit of a dry brush just now. And I'm sticking a little, I cheated. I put a little bit of this fuchsia because the color looked too orange and I wanted to brighten that. So I keep my eyeball on the subject. This is definitely going to get darker. And now I'm seeing the shape is a little different. I'm not sure if I should change it at this point, but this is what I'm looking at. And then bringing again, let me try that dry brush. What the dry brush will do is help you achieve the feeling of those little spots, okay? But be careful because here I have indicated highlights, and if I'm not careful, I'll go right over them, and I don't want to do that.
Kathy, the dry brush is an 8 also?
I'm sorry?
The dry brush is an 8 also?
This is my 8, yes. You can do dry brush with any number, but this holds a lot of paint. It's a bigger brush than, say, a number 4, number 3, or 2, or 6 even. So it does help. Okay, so again, there's a lot more forming I need to do with this apple. But I'm giving this a chance to dry between suggesting what's going on. Here, this apple does have, Faith, I'm really glad we moved this over because it's nice for everybody to see, even if I don't have it in exactly the same place. It's really good for everybody to see what I'm seeing and why I'm doing what I'm doing. The form of the apple, again, I don't want to cover up all of that yellow. And I just want to keep this, feels like it's way too orange. And again, I'll give it more color. And someone suggested if you have apples that you use a cloth and shine them up a little bit, you'll get more sheen out of it. All right, I gotta keep getting darker and darker. I'm gonna put a little burnt sienna, a little more of the, this is the alizarin, rose madder. And see, I'm just simply getting darker. I'm trying to think, how would I make this a little darker? Well, I could use a little bit of my purple, which I use as amethyst. Yeah, that's a beautiful color. I may be getting too dark too quick, but I'm going for it. Let's make this apple get darker here. And I'm really looking at these reflections. Now, right here, I might take another brush. I put just a little bit of water on that brush and dabbed it so that I can soften up this edge and bring it around this area. This is really kind of a highlighted area, but I'm letting that yellow show. This too. I don't want a hard edge right there. Soften up that edge and bring that down toward this center. Watch these. There's a lot of highlight here, but this has got to get darker. So I start with these linear lines because this is what I'm seeing, the streaks within the apple. And then I just come back with the brush and move that toward the spots, the highlights, and soften around the edges with the water on the brush. Okay. Gosh, there's even a little bit of a highlight right here and here. And I'll come back and make where these get darker. Now this is another highlight right in here. And I'm painting around the stem. The stem is actually sticking out now. While I looked at it over here, it was overlapping the apple. So I'm sticking with my sketch, making a few decisions as I go along where I need to adjust and where I will just keep it the way it is with my drawing. I'm going to soften this up and soften this up. And I always will have to keep going back, getting darker and darker for the shadows that are happening on the edges of the apple. Now it gets kind of dark right in here. and keeping my lines. I think right here, while it's still wet, I can get away with this. Take a little bit more of that purple. Ooh, that's a little heavy. Let's make it more this color. And what I'm looking at is over here and over here, I sense a real darkness also on this bottom edge of the apple. And then there's a bit of light here. And a bit of light, I want to lighten right here just by lifting a little. Yeah. And then keep going a little darker through here. So that the apple has that color that it needs to have. Okay. Again, not losing these little highlighted places. I'm kind of moving around the different highlights now to accentuate just the highlights as well as this dark spot, as the core of this apple stem will have a dark spot and even a bit of a shadow from that. So I'll soften up those lines with the brush with the water. Okay. And I feel like I need to get darker here again. Now, obviously I need to finish up the rest of the apples. I want to see if I could get that plate going a little bit more. And again, keeping, you know, I do see darker spots. This little rounded contour line for even the shadows, just building that up, these other two apples up the same way I have pretty much done this apple, and then softening the edges to keep your highlights. I think this has several highlights in one spot, so I might divide that up a little bit. All right, so you're getting the general idea for building the apples. I want to work on the shadows on the plate, and I want to do some patterning of the plate and how to deal with the background. So with the patterning, let's talk about the shadows. I would want to use some blue is a great color for shadow, blue-gray. And I just want to take a little bit of that purple that I had in my apple, sorry. Where am I? That's a little too purple, so I'm gonna go back a little more blue. And I just added water to my brush, and I'm going to go around. And again, I think it's because we have multiple lighting here. But I'm going to show that there's some light and darks to this shadow. In other words, out here, the shadow is more extended, and then next to the apple, it's much darker. So I'm pushing the purple blue together to get just a little darker right next to the apple. Okay, and here there are multiple shadows again, and with the apple over here. I think I'm going with the sketch I made because right now I see the shadow over here. Sorry, I just have to stick with what I sketched. And this goes on the rim of the plate. I'm observing now a bit of a shadow to the rim of the plate. And honestly, I see some more here. Again, it's the multiple shadows in the room. And sometimes having a photograph with one source of light is better to work from. But I'm telling you that my opinion is that we're always better off when we can work from life, where we learn more that way. We have to solve problems. Sometimes we don't want to solve those problems, but they're learning experiences for us. All right, so this patterning that I would do, and I would want to spend a little time actually doing all the shape drawing as the pattern works its way around this lip of the plate. Now that might take a little while, but it's basically, after you pencil draw it, it would mean that you have a blue line that's pretty consistent with a brush that will give you a nice point, and then just create your pattern. And I don't know, this is to me like therapeutic. So I never object to sitting there painting all those little shadows. But let me tell you, if that drives you crazy, then you might want to come up with something else. All right, so the stem would be painted with a little burnt sienna probably, and maybe a touch of yellow for the stem. And I think it's dry enough in this area for me to pop that there. And then when that dries, I'll put even a darker line and a shadow. I still feel like, well, I'm not done with this apple, because as it dries, it gets lighter and lighter, and you're going to see that it has a lot more dark. I think I just covered up one of my highlights. You have to keep pushing the dark. The more attention you give to this apple in terms of lights and shadows, the more you're going to get the realism that you're looking for. Okay, without losing your whites, without losing your highlights. And another little way of working with highlights, by the way, is to take a little brush that is like a scrub brush. This one is an acrylic brush, and we use this with the cherries. We can soften up some of the highlights. If we feel like, for instance, I see a little highlight right in here that I didn't really get, but I can create a bit of a highlight by adding water and lifting, okay? Now, this is getting too dark right here, right now. I'm gonna blend a little bit and soften that line. And I know that I'm going to come back and really make a dark here. I think it's too wet to do the dark right now, because I want it to be very contrasty. And I also want to be able to add that little bit of brown on the bottom of this to bring out that stem. Okay, and again, hit the bottom of this to darken and shadow that apple. The more you do, the more round it becomes. This background around the plate, if you choose to leave this on a table, well, now I have red on there. If you choose this to be on the table, say a white table or a light table, I really would not have done that color. But if I were going to make a dark, that's kind of interesting, but it just isn't right. Okay, if I were to keep the table dark, then I would make a very dark color. We do have to have a shadow where if it's a table, if it's sitting on a table. Gosh, I feel like I should turn it this way. This looks better, doesn't it? I turn it like that. I would mix a very dark color, the darkest color that I can make, and then you can discuss, do you want your background to be this dark, or do you want it to be a light table, or a brown table, or surface, or a pattern table for that matter. I always use blue and brown to get a dark gray, but if I want this color to go as black as I can get it, I know this is strange, but here I'm just going to put all the dark colors together, but the best dark color I can use is this Windsor green with this purple, my amethyst. Now, it still has a blue character to it, so I'm going to add a little more of the brown. To me, this is about as black as I can get, but it's a beautiful black. I do not have black paint in my palette, and I never use black paint, but I love to make black. And to make the black, if this is what I chose to do, I would begin, and really this does pop the painting. I would use the bigger brush, a flat, and even maybe a bigger brush than this one. and use this for my background. You might even need to mix up a nice batch before you begin, because I'll tell you, here's a little trick, and this is important to know, I think, is if you're gonna make a color and you run out, then the best thing you can do is wet that area. Don't leave the brush lines there. And because I've run off the page here, I can get away with that. And then just keep going. You can always backtrack or let it dry and then come back and if you let it dry, it's easier to go back and do a second coat and you're in better shape, I do believe. And then again, if I'm gonna run out, and I'm not gonna finish this right now, but I do like that black. I really do. I like that dark, dark background. Now you can do something interesting, and now that's not a bad choice either. It allows the dark over here in the light, and you can continue the light around just by adding water to this color. But again, I'm not gonna finish this, so since I'm just gonna keep adding water until I run out, and then that allows this to dry without that hard edge that you would have if you just stopped. All right. I know you're ready to paint your apples. Remember that you're going to arrange them and try not to wiggle them too much. Now, see, this is running out and it's just very pale water, so I can leave it just like that. You're going to build your apples, you're going to play with your pattern, but first of all, it's about starting the apple shapes and then putting the plate around it. Good luck and have fun.